Well, Deborah, thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here.
I am so glad you're here. Okay, I think I agree with this, but this is something that you write. You write that kids today are awe deprived. So why is that, and what impact does this have on their emotional well-being and development?
So, that is something that the lead awe researcher, Dr. Keltner, who's studied this emotion for 20 years, that's actually a direct quote from him that I agree with as well. And I think it goes back to the sources of awe. And so, in my book, I detail kind of these seven primary things that kind of elicit awe. And you think about nature, and this generation generally is spending less time in nature than previous ones. Art and music, and again, those are often the first things cut from public schools when there are budget cuts. And then there's this idea of being in community, this collective effervescence, this ability to be part of a group engaged in something good together. And the pandemic took a real toll on that. During the pandemic, I think especially our preteens and teens who so crave that sense of community. I just feel like we haven't fully rebounded in terms of being able to be in community again, even in the little things like us taking our kids to the farmers markets or the grocery store, which we got in the habit of, shopping online. And then one of my favorite, most hopeful pieces is that, the goodness of other people, this just sense of kindness, that's one of the primary sources of awe. And I feel like, especially our preteens and teens, are so saturated with social media news stories that show the opposite, that show the worst of humans, that show, a really kind of damning portrait of who we are. And I think all of these combine to lead toward just not quite as much vibrancy when it comes to those small everyday moments that just bring that spark of goosebumps and wide eyes and that sense of this world might be messy, but it's really, really beautiful. And so I think as parents, being just a little more intentional about seeking it out ourselves can help us seek it out for our kids, who I do think are more and more awe deprived.
Yeah, I would think it would go back further than the pandemic. Really, a lot of the things, we've been on trajectory, but especially with smartphones and things
Yeah.
like that, just the idea of sort of eroding away all of the extra time, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not going to get a feeling of awe if you're just constantly distracted. Like you have to be in kind of a quiet, present space, which is, I think, for kids, a natural state for kids if they're left to their own devices and have enough time and space and a lack of distraction to do that.
Yeah, because awe does require slowing down and paying attention. Many of the sources of awe are deeply sensory, right? It's the sounds, it's the sights, it's going on that walk without the earphones in and hearing that bird call. It's being in the stands, watching our kids and being fully present. And, in a very attention divided world, that's just harder, right? It's harder for us as parents. It's harder for our kids because sometimes there are these sources of awe that are there and we just don't notice them, right? The other day we were driving home and there was this gorgeous sunset. And so I was like, told my kids to look up because sometimes it just requires looking up. And my daughter said, quite movingly, she said, I wonder how many of the world's leaders right now take time just to look at sunsets. And I just thought that was a really kind of beautiful framing of some of the struggles we're having in this world, right? Like if we spent a little more time looking up and noticing and feeling that sense of wonder, which we can talk about later, has so many good positive outcomes for ourselves and our kids, what would that do for us? What would it do for this generation, which we keep, harping on how anxious they are and, teenagers get a bad rap right now. I don't think always deservedly. And I just wonder what small tweaks we could make just to re-engage with what's most fundamental and beautiful.
I can imagine a parent listening to this and saying, like, yeah, awe sounds really nice. Like, that sounds lovely to look at sunsets and things like that. but to say kids, but to say kids are awe deprived, like what is that impact that it has on kids? Like, is there a measurable impact that it has on kids, for kids who are, they're doing travel soccer and they're eating dinner in the car and they're on their phone texting and they're missing those sunsets? Like, is it really a problem for them?
The research doesn't really look at like, hey, let's break these kids into two groups and keep some away from it, keep some. But what it does do is, there's just this really robust research about this emotion that does show the positive outcomes. And I think that's the thing to focus on. And I often give talks to like middle and high schoolers, right, in assemblies. And kids really resonate with this topic. Like, I think at their core, they want more of this in their lives. And I think it helps for kids to actually understand why it's good for them. So just on some broad levels, we know that experiencing this feeling of awe and wonder, and again, like, think about when your eyes grow wide or you gasp because something is just wow. We know that it leads to better mental health and wellness, including a reduction in symptoms of anxiety, biomarkers of stress and inflammation. They've done this on 3-year-olds before and after music classes. They've done this on 80-year-olds before and after taking awe walks, where you just go out and notice something beautiful. They've done this with, kids who have experienced a lot of community violence, who then go into nature and they find that it literally reduces the biomarkers of stress and inflammation. It also very much helps kids academically. There's just robust research that shows that when you experience wonder, it enhances your curiosity, right? You want to know why. And then you are authentically motivated to learn. Mm-hmm. And so, and I was a teacher for 20 years. And so I love this idea that if you can tap into what makes a kid light up, it actually primes them for learning. And one of the pieces of research I loved was they found that if you can tap into that about something they care about, like let's say your kid, you do a little science experiment and they're like, wow, you can do then something 20 minutes later that's not as exciting, that they're not interested in, but they still learn it more quickly because you've primed their brain for learning. And so it gets me thinking about all those kids who aren't as engaged, and how can we take their fascinations and interests and you kind of use that and channel that. And I think that's a really exciting idea for parents and for educators. And there's also this great research that awe helps us be more connected as a community. It helps us be more connected to other people. It helps us be more kind and generous. And, the researchers kind of wonder why, because all emotions have functions, right? Mm-hmm. Like they all have evolutionary purposes. We feel disgust so we don't eat the rotten chicken. We feel anger because there's a sense of injustice. We feel fear to act us so we can run away from the moving train or the tiger. So the question is, like, why have we evolved to feel awe, right? And one of the thoughts is it does help as a bit of a community binding, because awe is often found in community, right? It's when, you have everybody outside looking at the eclipse and you just feel that sense of connection to a neighbor. And they find that, like, when researchers, when they prime them with like really awe-inspiring video or take them outside, they're more aware of the stranger who comes by and drops their pencils. Like they're more likely to help pick up those pencils. That was a study done at UC Berkeley. And so there's just this fascinating idea that experiencing these things, which don't need to be the Grand Canyon, but just like trying to build it more into our diet, has all of these outcomes of things we want for ourselves and our kids anyway, which feels exciting to me, because this is not like a prescriptive idea or like you need to say this or change your parenting strategy or your parenting philosophy. It's more about like tuning in just a little bit more to what's around you anyway.
Yeah, I guess the feeling of awe makes us feel connected. We are part of this universe, and then you feel more connected to it, then you feel more connected to the people around you. And yeah, we're generally, there's a lot of disconnection right now. So, yeah. Enormous amounts of disconnection. So yeah, I guess we could use sort of more of that, I imagine. Well, so as we talked about, this requires us to maybe unplug a little, slow down a little, right? Like you're saying, like in bringing this thing, and I love this idea. It's so simple, but for a busy parent trying to juggle work, dinner, bedtime, all of the things, what does it actually look like to kind of slow down childhood in the everyday moments?
So, a couple of ideas here. One, on a more macro scale, I think we're living in a very achievement-oriented culture. And I think sometimes being willing to take a deep breath and look at our lives and say, is this working for us as a family? Like this many activities? And maybe it is. But I think there's this idea of radical curiosity, which I talk about in the book, which is really paying attention to your kid and what you may not have noticed before. And part of that is looking at what's lighting them up, what's making them the best version of themselves, what's draining their batteries. And that just may involve asking some questions like, they've been doing travel soccer for 5 years. Maybe this is the thing that really does light them up. Or am I really pushing them out the door every single Saturday, right? Am I seeing that this maybe not be the thing for them anymore? And I think, childhood and adolescence both is such a time where kids need the ability to explore and to figure out who they are. And I think, sometimes there's this desire to almost professionalize childhood, like figure out when you're 10 years old what you want to do. And I describe in the book how, between ages 10 and 13, my daughter literally dropped every single activity she'd been involved with and picked up an entirely new set. And it was so exciting to kind of watch, but also disconcerting for me and for her in some ways, because it was like, oh, but your identity was kind of this, and now it's this. But that is part of this growing up, is to try to step back and figure out and have that time to wander and to explore. So that's more of the macro. I think on the micro with the slowing down, it is so hard to be a parent in this society. I never want to put anything more on the plate. But working on this book the last 4 years has really been transformational for me personally, because I find myself looking for like one beautiful thing every day that I can share with my kids, share with a friend. I try to socialize it. I have some friends that I share this with, and now I have like 6 friends who will like text me pictures or their awe moments, which is so fun. Like I got one today from someone who just said, I saw, this picture of this little frog outside, and I thought gave me goosebumps. I thought you might like to see it. And so it's kind of like I have this like subset of like moms now who are like, we're all looking for it, and we're looking for it as much for ourselves as for our kids. And so, having this framework of these sources of awe, I find myself, when I'm having one of those really rough days, actually consciously thinking, how can I have 15 seconds of this? Just 15 seconds. And there was this one day in February, and my son had the flu. He was out of school for 2 weeks. I'm in Boston. It was brutal. It was so cold. And it was a Monday. It'd been 1 week into a sickness, and I had deadlines, and I was feeling crummy just in general. And I was driving to get my other kid from school, and I was like, I'm going to notice one beautiful thing on this ride. I was like, come hell or high water. And then, of course, I got behind the school bus, right, which stops every 5 minutes, and I was ticked off.
The diesel fumes.
Yeah, I wasn't feeling it. It was just gross outside. And so we're driving, and so slowly, and it stops. And I'm like, ah. But I look over to my right, and there's this beautiful like golden retriever sitting at the top of a driveway. And the minute his high schooler comes plodding down the bus steps, this golden retriever went flying down the driveway and just jumped on his kid. And this kid who had this hoodie on, right, in sub-zero temperatures, you could just see him like kind of grinning as the dog was jumping. And suddenly, like, I had it. Like, I felt it. For those 15 seconds, and it didn't cure the day. It didn't make my son better. But it just was that reminder of, oh, it's just always out there. And if I can take the deep breath and tune into it, it makes 15 seconds of that day a little bit easier. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, they're the grand things, but also once this becomes almost just a bit of a way of thinking, and you want to look for it, it's kind of like the zeitgeist. It just starts coming. The more you look for it, the more you see it, right? It's like when you start, the people who are bird watchers, I feel like all my friends in their 40s are suddenly interested in birds. And, there was a world where I didn't know birds really existed. And now I go outside and say, I think I just heard a red-winged blackbird because I'm tuning into it and I'm noticing it.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be, from something as big as, I don't know, people have talked about like, I'm giving my kids a 90s summer, right? Like, which is like the non-structured summer.
Yeah.
Or it could be as small as like, just look for it. Just look for it somewhere, even if you're having a bad day, to kind of anchor you in the beauty of the world.
Yeah.
Remember that. It's
kind of like a meditation practice, but that doesn't require you to sit and breathe. I'm not a great meditator because I have a very active brain and I have a very hard time, and then I start getting mad at myself for not shutting my brain out. And so I find that I often will go on these walks with the dog that I consciously think of as an awe walk, where I like don't put my podcast in to listen to. And I find that for me, that like almost ticks off the meditation box of like, oh, I'm just slowing down my brain and noticing a little bit more. And so, for all of those, busy moms who may feel like I should meditate, like sometimes this type of thing brings some of that rejuvenation, even if you don't feel like you can get, 20 minutes of quiet time in the house.
Yeah, mindful walking is a wonderful way to practice mindfulness. It's really great. And Deborah, you don't have to turn off your brain when you meditate, just so you know.
I know. And yet, it's like, notice it, let it go.
That's the bicep curl of meditation, just so you know.
Yeah.
That's when you build the muscle. But, it's okay. Just go for your walks. You're good. I'm not saying you have to meditate, but anyway.
But you're right. It is so good for you, and I sometimes give up too easily on it.
Yeah, it's like exercise. You start small. You start with your mindful walks, and then you say, "Oh, okay, it was nice to be present, like during these walks." Like, I wonder would I have the same aversion just sitting for 3 minutes in my house and breathing, right? Like,
right.
Can I be curious about that and get to know my own brain a little bit more and be friends with it a little more?
I love that.
That's the attitude you want. Okay, so you encourage families to embrace PDF, playtime, downtime, and family time.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to think about like working parents. How can they realistically incorporate this, especially when the weekdays feel like really like a sprint?
Yeah. So this acronym PDF, Playtime, Downtime, Family Time, it comes out of research from Challenge Success, which is an organization out of Stanford University that really is working a lot with these high-pressure, high-achieving groups of parents. And they looked at meta-studies of kids who were resilient, right? Who actually able to have that psychological capacity of bouncing back. And one of the factors they found was that kids who had playtime, downtime, and family time, it really contributed to their ability to be resilient. And, again, this is a framework, not a checklist. This is, for me, just a little bit of a mental model. And what I like about it is it fits in beautifully with awe. And so, I think about, like with playtime, and my kids who are a little older, they're 11 and 13. And, playtime might be like 5 minutes of basketball with my son outside because he loves playing basketball. I kind of consider like listening to music and kind of singing along in the car with my 13-year-old as playtime because it feels very playful, right? It doesn't have to be like playing, My Little Pony on the floor with your kids. Downtime, again, I think everyone in the family needs some downtime, including us parents. And in the family time, I go back to that research that talks about like how family dinner, and I'll use that as a marker, right? Of like the ritual of having everybody together. And I describe it in the book as most days, all of us in the family are in the kitchen generally eating a meal at roughly the same time. It's not always dinner. Sometimes it's breakfast. Sometimes it's dessert. Like, let's everybody get a bowl of ice cream. But these rituals are really important for kids, right? They're grounding. We know that. And so, you know, it's always, I think, dangerous to say, oh, no, it has to be family dinner. And then, of course, like, the after school schedules are such, and then you feel like, oh, no, I didn't get there. But if generally you're thinking, you know, how can I have some time? How can we be together on a predictable basis, at least a few times a week? Because again, that we just know that's good for kids. That these ability to touch in and touch base. And you know, some of the research talks about, you know, that in terms of kind of time with a parent, that the magic number is 5 minutes a day of undivided time. And this comes out of Boston University's Center for Anxiety and Resilience. And they talk about 5 minutes where it's child directed, meaning it's not, have you brushed your teeth? Have you practiced piano? Is your homework done? And oh my goodness, when I really think about my interactions with my kids, how much of it is me asking questions like that? It's a lot.
Too, yeah.
And they're like, if for like 5 minutes a day, you can just sit and be with them for whatever they want to talk about. And for my son, that may be him telling me about NBA basketball or the latest Marvel movie. You know, for my daughter, it may be I go upstairs and I'm folding her clothes and, you know, we chat for a couple of minutes. Now that, you know, it's a teenager, really that 5 minutes a day is usually the New York Times mini crossword, which we do before bed each night.
That's cute.
She likes it. I like it. That won't, you know, she might not next year, but right now that works. And I know like that's a ritual that we do together and it feels good for her. It feels good for me. And so again, I feel like all of these things for me, it's just a framework, right? It's not a to-do list. It's just the sense of if things are feeling off in the house, if I'm feeling really frazzled, you know, are we having enough downtime? Are we having enough family time? Are we taking a deep breath? Am I replenishing my own, you know, my own bucket? Have my kids been outside? Because going outside sometimes is like a reset button. It's just like unplugging and plugging in your computer. I feel like sometimes I just drag my youngest out on a walk with me and the dog because I know that he will feel better when he comes in. Even if he grumbles going on the walk, it will be like a reset button for him to be outside and breathing and having that soft attention that comes from being in nature.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is for this PDF, playtime, downtime, and family time, so essential, so nourishing, so connecting, right? Slowing us down a little. It can be something, if you're a listener who has younger kids and you're starting to establish the rhythms and the patterns of your life with your kids, like maybe this is a good time to really anchor in playtime, anchor in downtime, anchor in family time, you know, like have them be predictable rhythms in your lifestyle. Maybe if you have older kids, it may be, you know, don't give up on your kids. Like don't write them off as they don't want to be with me and don't care about me. It is make an effort to, however small, create those moments of connection, of playfulness, of being together as a family.
Absolutely. And I was chatting with Robert Waldinger. He's a professor at Harvard. He wrote The Good Life. So it's this longevity study where they followed people for like 50 years, and then he tracked the results. And really, of course, The Good Life is about relationships, and you know that from Raising Good Humans. It's so deeply about the relationships we have. And he was talking about rituals with our older ones, and he said, you know, it's your teenager's job to pull away, and it's your job to pull them in and connect. And it doesn't need, and it's going to be a push-pull, but he said, you know, if you're going to have dinner with the grandparents every Sunday, expect them at some point to say, I don't want to. And part of your job is to say, well, you don't have to stay for 3 hours, but you have to go because we do this as a family. And he said, right, sometimes those routines can really be so centering for kids, even if they complain about them, because it's that predictability of knowing that I have these check-in moments with my family, and grumbling, you know, grumbling is part of being a teenager, right?
Yeah,
Doesn't mean we give up on it. It's their job. It's their job to grumble and not want to go. And yet those predictable, even if they're small, predictable things that we do as a family really provide a framework of support and, of connection that is super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that part of our nightly dinner routine is me telling my daughter to get her knees down underneath the table. And then that probably, at some point, she's going to miss it. She'll be like, oh, I guess I need to put my knees under the table. I don't know. You talk about, one of your ideas you talk about is to help kids find awe in big questions. And I was wondering if you could give us an example of how, maybe we're in the proverbial car ride where a kid can't escape, or we're at the dinner table. What are maybe some big questions we can introduce without it feeling like a lecture?
For me, it's less that I'm introducing the big questions, but I'm getting really interested in their big questions and like pushing it a little further. In other words, so my youngest is really into the TV show Survivor. He loves it. We have all kinds of conversations. And so, what the Survivor 50 reunion's coming up. And my husband was like, why don't you make your predictions? And he's like, oh, that's great. And he said, he was trying to figure out how to do it. And my husband said, well, do you want to figure out a spreadsheet and do some, statistics on this? And it was just like, the eyes got big. He got so excited. And part of it is because we're interested in something he's interested in, but then it's kind of pushing it, like, what could you do with this, right? And I feel like in my own life, the best gift my dad gave to me, he was a parent who I recognize now was neurodivergent and really struggled with big crowds. And there are 5 of us, and that was really overwhelming a lot of the time. But he invested himself in our curiosities. So when I, in 4th grade, said I might be interested in being a geologist, he brought me home like a college geology textbook. And like he took me up into the little mountain foothills and like helped me identify the different layers. And then I had this opportunity to go on a plane to Japan when I was 12. My first time on an airplane because I had some cousins who lived over there. And I came back to small town Utah, and my dad had like checked out a book on how to make sushi, which you could not find in my town, and like had figured out how to get some seaweed paper, and we made some rice, and we got canned tuna, and he was like, we'll figure out how to make sushi. And these are core memories where it's this sense of, he took my idea seriously, and that helped me think bigger questions. And, again, I spent 20 years in the classroom as a teacher and administrator, and that was always really the trick to get kids engaged, was to listen to what was lighting them up and to ask them questions that got them excited. So I'd be like, oh, so sounds like you're kind of curious about space. Have you thought about, or have you heard about, or this is a great one, I don't understand how black holes work. Like, can you help me figure it out? And sometimes when you put it on them to be the teachers for you, like that's a great, if you have a curious kid, and even.
That's good, because I've had to ask lots of questions of my kids just out of.
Yeah, it's.
Honestly not knowing things.
Exactly. And I feel like kids often are like, wow, I have the capacity to be useful here, right? I have a capacity to teach something to someone else. I was even in the car the other day, and my son was describing something in the Marvel universe, and and I was like, can you back up and explain these relationships? And he started to, and then I asked more questions, and he's like, well, I hadn't thought about that, and you could see his mind going, just because it was authentic conversation about something that got him excited. And so that type of just tuning in, I think sometimes when we have a kid who's really talkative, and I have one of those, it can be easy to be like, okay, I've been talked out. But it's the well-placed, it's noticing what they're noticing and showing you're intrigued. And then, especially if you have younger ones, one of my favorite activities I used to do with my kids, go to the library and be like, pick out 10 books that look interesting to you for any reason. And often, like even the nonfiction section, not that we'd read them all, but it'd be fascinating to see, like they take it so seriously, like a book on volcanoes, a book on Greek myths, a book on blank. And then it was just a matter of like, let's flip through this. And that's, public libraries. If you want a 1990 summer, like use your public library, because those are magical places. And bringing home that stack of books and letting kids flip through it and seeing what kind of intrigues them, it's a great source of wonder.
I love the library. I went to the library recently, or in the spring, and they had a whole clutch of chicks, like chicken eggs that were hatching there at the library. It was so cool. They've done that for many years, but that was a great source of awe for me, because we actually, I wasn't there with my kid. They went later on their own, but I was there with either my husband or my friend, but we were just watching them peck. I mean, I got there just the right time where we're just watching them peck out of these little eggs and just then be flopped over and the cheeping and just the whole thing. And it's just like, oh my gosh. I mean, talk about an awe-inspiring experience that was. I mean, but yeah, and then all kinds of things, of course, at the library.
Yeah. And if there are any local farms near you, that's the type of thing also, if you just want a quick source. Actually, my 13-year-old is working at an organic farm all this week at farm camp, and she got home today and she's like, we got to hold the baby chicks, speaking of, and again, face lit up. And yesterday she got to feed a baby lamb, the last bottle before it was, graduating from that. This was the run to the litter. And, if you want to see your 13-year-old's face light up, like puppies, babies, chicks, these are those things that just put you back in touch with, like, this amazing mystery of life and the beauty of it. So,
well, that's one of your categories, the circle of life, right?
Yes. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, babies. And yeah, we have a 2-year-old across the street from us. And so the girls, my teenage daughters, connect sometimes with her, and we all love it. It's just, definitely does put us in touch with that. Okay. If a parent listening today wants to start one small awe-inviting ritual in their family life this week, where would you suggest that they begin?
I'll give 2 suggestions.
Okay.
One, if you're doing it for yourself, I would try an awe walk 2 times this week. And this is, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, where you literally walk around and you just tune in to your neighborhood. Try to notice something you haven't noticed before. It may be a sound, it might be a scent. It just tune into the 5 senses, and that's a great practice. Then, I might say my favorite personal practice is, again, I look for something beautiful every day. But I also, especially because the news is so overwhelming right now, I really try to find like one either personal moment or story even on social media of somebody being kind, because I need that and I need to share that, right? Like, these are the things that remind me, because I clicked on the New York Times this morning and it was overwhelming, right? Just that list. And it's so, again, easy for our kids to see that and just have such a kind of skewed sense of like, when I really truly do believe that most humans are good, right? And so there's this wonderful researcher named Jamil Zaki. He wrote a book called Hope for Cynics. He's a parent of 2 daughters. He's at Stanford University, and he calls this social savoring. And he said it's when you find this one moment where you see somebody being good. Maybe it's an interaction at the grocery store. Maybe your neighbor takes in your trash barrels. And he said, and as a father, I take it one step further. I look for that moment every day, and I share it with my kids. And that's the practice. And that can be so organic. That doesn't need to be like mom's good news moment, which kids will tune out to. It can just be like, oh my gosh, did you know that, Mike across the street, like, brought in the trash barrels? Like, it was so nice of him. It can be so simple. I also find that with my older one, who does have a phone, but doesn't have social media yet, sometimes I find a cute picture, or I'll find a news story that I think will resonate with her, or a song, and I'll text it to her. And again, like, and what I found is that she'll often text me back something that she finds beautiful or she finds interesting, or sometimes she'll just put a heart and we'll move on. But I'm kind of thinking about how do I counterbalance the diet? And so it helps me, for myself, to look for something beautiful and kind every day. And then again, just one step further and find an organic way to share it with my kids. And I feel like that's something we can do as a family that will feed us and takes no money, very little time, next to no resources.
Yeah, all of these things do. This is so wonderful. Um, I I love this book, Raising Awe Seekers. Deborah Farmer Kris's book, Raising Awe Seekers, can be found anywhere books are sold. Do you have an audiobook version too? I'm
It's
sure.
coming, not out yet,
Coming.
but it will
Okay.
be.
Okay. Audiobook is coming. Um, go get it. And if people want to find out more about you and continue the conversation, where can they find you?
So Parenthood365 is my handle for everything. So parenthood365.com, on Instagram, on Substack. So if you take that handle and type it in, you'll find me on lots of different platforms.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I really appreciate it. I feel like I needed maybe a dose of remembering to remembering to think about awe and remembering to tune into it personally. So I personally appreciate that today. And yeah, I think it's such a beautiful, simple way to just really, you know, remember what a gift it is that we're here, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for the work that you've done and the work that you've done in this book, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.